Could you imagine a person spending a night in the heart of a raging snowstorm without shelter and surviving? It seems impossible because the open Great Plains in winter become one of the harshest places on the planet. However, for the indigenous peoples of North America, this was not a theory, but a harsh reality that they knew how to cope with. They did not just survive, they existed in harmony with the cold, turning their enemy into an ally and the elements into part of their philosophy. They did not just survive, they possessed a deep knowledge that allowed them to face the elements head-on, using only what nature provided them and the strength of their own spirit. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how Native American tribes survived blizzards in the open, turning snow into a warm shelter and sleeping together into an art form, where every breath and movement served a single purpose: to meet the dawn alive. What if I told you that you didn't always need a knife to survive a snowstorm on the open plains? For indigenous peoples such as the Lakota and Cheyenne, the Great Plains were home, but in winter that home became a harsh test. The key factor in the danger was not so much the low temperature as the wind, which penetrated any clothing and greatly intensified the feeling of cold. This wind carried not soft snow, but fine sand-like ice crystals that clogged everything. Therefore, the first and foremost task was not to keep warm, but to stop the wind and deprive it of its power. This did not require building a full-fledged dwelling, for which there was simply no time in the midst of a sudden blizzard. A quick and effective measure was needed, one that could be implemented in a matter of minutes. It was this philosophy of quick response that formed the basis of their survival tactics in open terrain. Instead of fighting nature, they became part of it, using the elements themselves for protection. The snow brought by the blizzard was transformed from an enemy into a building material. Knowledge of how snow behaves at different temperatures and wind speeds was fundamental. They understood that snow is one of the best natural insulators, capable of retaining heat. A group caught in a storm on the road did not panic, but began to act in a coordinated and methodical manner. The first thing to do was to find a suitable place, even if there seemed to be nothing but endless, flat steppe around. Any change in the terrain, even the slightest, could be the key to survival. It could be a small ravine, a leeward slope of a hill, or even just tall bushes. They knew that the most dangerous thing was to lie directly on the frozen ground. The ground draws heat from the body at an incredible rate, much faster than the air. Therefore, creating an insulating layer between the body and the ground was the #1 priority, even more important than protection from the wind. It was a multi-layered process in which every step was critical. If the terrain did not provide natural protection, they created it artificially. Using their knowledge of where the wind accumulated snowdrifts, they could find a place where the snow was already deep enough. In this snow, they dug something like a trench or a shallow pit, deep enough for the whole group to fit in. The walls of this pit alone provided protection from the direct wind. A low wall was formed from the dugout snow or from the snow around it on the leeward side. This wall served as a windbreak that broke up the main flow of icy air. It did not need to be high or sturdy. Its task was only to change the aerodynamics of the flow, forcing the wind to pass over the sheltered people rather than through them. Inside this improvised trench, they began to lay out their beds. First, they threw everything that could create an air layer onto the bottom. These could be wormwood branches that they had brought with them, or dry grass found nearby. Then they spread out spare skins or pieces of tanned leather. The culmination was the laying down of the group. People lay down close to each other, shoulder to shoulder, to minimize heat loss. There was no personal space. There was only a shared space for survival. The most enduring and strongest lay down at the edges, creating an additional barrier for those who were weaker or in the center. Finally, the entire group was covered with all available bison hides or other warm blankets. These hides were sewn together or simply overlapped to form a single dome. Under this dome, the heat exhaled by people was retained, and the temperature quickly became significantly higher than outside. We would love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this level of interdependence and trust necessary for survival? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Want to know the secret that allowed indigenous peoples to predict the weather better than any modern barometer? Survival in a blizzard did not begin when the first snowflakes fell, but long before that. The key skill was the ability to read nature and sense the approach of a storm. This knowledge was vital because it gave the group time to either find reliable shelter or, if that was not possible, to prepare mentally and physically for a night in the field. The indigenous peoples of the plains and Subarctic were incredibly observant. They noticed the slightest changes in the environment that would go unnoticed by modern humans. One of the main indicators was a change in wind direction. If the wind changed sharply, became gusty, or conversely died down unnaturally before sunset, it was a sure sign of impending change. They also paid attention to the sky. The appearance of light, feathery clouds that gradually thickened and descended indicated the approach of a snow front. Particular attention was paid to the color of the sunset. An overly bright, sickly yellow or copper hue in the western sky often foreshadowed strong winds and blizzards. Even the air changed before a storm. It became particularly transparent, and sounds carried further and more clearly than usual. This phenomenon, associated with changes in atmospheric pressure, was a sure sign for them to prepare. They could literally feel the approaching bad weather. Upon receiving these warnings, the group immediately changed their plans. If there was a valley with a forest or a deep ravine nearby, they tried with all their might to reach it before nightfall. It was a race against time, with very high stakes. The presence of natural shelter, such as a dense pine forest, radically increased the chances of a comfortable night's sleep. If the storm caught them in a completely open area, which was common on the Great Plains, they immediately began preparing for an emergency overnight stay. No one waited until things got really bad. The decision was made quickly, while it was still light and people still had strength. The first thing they did was check their equipment. All warm clothes, bison robes, extra moccasins, and mittens had to be at hand. They also prepared an untouchable supply of pemmican, a high-calorie food that provided the body with fuel to generate heat. They ate a portion of this fatty and nutritious food in advance. This was important because the digestion process itself generates heat. Going out into the cold night on an empty stomach was extremely dangerous. The body had to have internal resources to fight the cold. Choosing a place to spend the night was the first tactical decision. The group surveyed the area in search of the slightest depression. Even a small hollow or a place where tall grass grew was better than a flat field. This place provided at least minimal protection from the wind and helped the snow accumulate in the right place. In this way, survival was proactive rather than reactive. They did not wait for the elements to corner them. They acted preemptively, using their deep knowledge of the environment to soften the blow. But what if I told you that one of the most ingenious survival techniques had nothing to do with clothing or shelter, but rather with how they used each other's body heat? In the next chapter, we will reveal the unique secrets of collective survival. Are you ready for the shocking truth? It turns out that dozens of shelters can be found in the bare steppe if you know where to look. To us modern people, the plain looks like a flat, monotonous landscape. But for indigenous peoples, it was a complex world full of micro-relief, every element of which was important. Choosing the right place to spend the night in a blizzard was not just luck, but an exact science. The first rule was, avoid peaks and open spaces. At the top of a hill, the wind reaches its maximum speed and force. Lying down there was tantamount to voluntarily giving all your warmth to the elements. It was much wiser to descend to the leeward slope, that is, the side of the hill that was protected from the wind. Even on a seemingly flat plain, there are always waves. These are small, gentle hills and hollows left by ancient water flows. An experienced eye could determine where such a hollow was located, even if it was only a meter deep. This meter was critically important, as it allowed one to escape the strongest winds that blow at the very surface of the earth. The ideal places were considered to be the so-called coulees, or dry ravines. These were the beds of dried-up streams that cut through the plain. Descending to the bottom of such a ravine, the group found themselves completely protected from the wind. Even if the storm raged above, it was relatively quiet below. However, the ravines also had their own dangers. If the storm was strong, the ravine could fill completely with snow. Therefore, they did not choose the narrowest bottom, but settled on the slope of the ravine, slightly above its deepest point. This provided protection from the wind, but reduced the risk of being buried under a snowdrift. Another saving feature of the landscape was the thickets. On the plains, these were most often willows or poplars growing along rare watercourses. Even if the river froze, the dense thickets of shrubs and trees created a powerful natural windbreak. The group could take shelter inside such an island of vegetation. In forested areas, such as those inhabited by subarctic peoples, the choice was even richer. They looked for a group of dense coniferous trees, such as spruce or fir. Their low-hanging branches, covered with snow, created an almost ready-made shelter. The snow on the branches served as additional insulation, and the ground beneath the trees was often less frozen. After choosing a common place, they began to prepare the site in detail. If there were pine or spruce trees nearby, they created a thick mattress of branches on the ground. This layer, several tens of centimeters thick, was absolutely necessary. It created an air cushion that prevented body heat from escaping into the frozen ground. If there were no branches, as was often the case in the open prairie, dry grass and wormwood were used. They raked everything they could find into one large pile, forming a common nest. This layer was the very barrier that separated the world of the living from the icy touch of the earth. Only after the nest was ready did the group begin to build a windbreak wall, if it was still necessary. In this way, they solved two main problems. First, conductive heat exchange, heat loss through contact with the ground, and only then convective heat exchange, heat loss from the wind. This sequence was critically important. Like this video if you are also surprised at how profound this survival geography was. Guess what happens when you use what is trying to freeze you to keep yourself warm? It sounds like a paradox, but this was one of the main secrets of survival. The indigenous peoples of the Subarctic and the plains mastered the art of turning snow from a threat into a protector. They understood what physics confirms today. Snow is an excellent insulator. Freshly fallen, fluffy snow is 90% air trapped between crystals. This immobile air is one of the best heat insulators in nature. It works just like animal fur or down in a modern jacket. The main task was to use this property. On the Great Plains where the wind raged, the snow was rarely fluffy. It clumped together into dense, hard layers known as fern. This dense snow was not as good an insulator, but it was an ideal building material. It could be cut into blocks or simply raked together to create sturdy walls. When a group caught in a blizzard found a suitable place, they immediately began to dig in. If there was enough snow, they dug a trench perpendicular to the wind direction. The depth of the trench depended on time and strength, but even a half-meter deep trench was a huge advantage. All the snow removed from the trench was not thrown aside, but piled up on the windward side. This mound served as a windbreak. Its height was small, often no more than a meter, but this was enough to deflect the main wind flow upward, creating a calm zone behind the wall. The peoples of the Subarctic, such as the Cree and Athabascans, who lived in the taiga zone, went even further. They were masters at building so-called quinzees. This is a temporary snow shelter that differs from an igloo. No special snow blocks were needed for a quinzee. They raked a large, high pile of snow and carefully trampled it down. After that, they waited for some time, from half an hour to 2 hours, for the snow to set or freeze. During this time, the snow crystals froze together, making the pile solid. Then, armed with shovels or just their hands, they began to scoop out the snow from the inside, forming a hollow cave. It was hard work, but the result was worth it. Inside the quinze, even without a fire, the temperature could be 20-30 degrees higher than outside. The warmth of one or two people quickly heated the small enclosed space. If there was no time for a quinzee, they built a simple semicircular snow barrier. Inside this semicircle, with their backs to the wall, the group would huddle together. It was not as effective as a closed cave, but it was much better than nothing. Even simply burrowing into a snowdrift that the wind had piled up at the foot of a hill was a workable tactic. A person could dig a hole for themselves, climb into it, and close the entrance with a block of snow. Under the thick layer of snow, they were protected from both the wind and the extremely low temperatures on the surface. But what did they do to keep from freezing from the ground itself? In the next chapter, you will learn how they solved the problem of the icy bed. To survive in extreme cold, it was not enough to hide from the wind or throw a fur cape over your shoulders. The real danger lurked below. The ground, frozen to a rock-like state, acted like a silent predator, drawing heat from the body with relentless efficiency. This is not just a feeling of cold, it is a law of physics. Frozen soil has high thermal conductivity. It absorbs heat until the temperature equalizes, and does so dozens of times faster than icy air. Indigenous peoples knew this not from physics textbooks, but from experience passed down through the centuries. A single person who fell asleep directly on the snow could freeze to death in a matter of hours, even if the air temperature was not too low. Therefore, the main law of survival was, never lie down on the bare ground. Before lying down, it was necessary to build a barrier, a boundary between oneself and the cold ground. And until this insulation was ready, no one allowed themselves to rest. The process of making a bed was a collective action, practiced to the point of automatism. Every member of the group knew what to do. Some broke off the lower dry branches of fir trees, some raked grass, some leveled the ground, or dug a shallow trench to protect against the wind. Everything was done without fuss, but quickly. Time was of the essence. Coniferous branches were the ideal material. Their needles, saturated with air, created a springy and dry mattress, and the resinous stems repelled moisture and slowly gave off heat if they were slightly warmed by the fire before being laid down. A layer of pine branches 20 to 30 centimeters thick provided reliable insulation. If the situation allowed, the branches were laid in two layers, the lower one with the thick ends in one direction, the upper one in the opposite direction to fill all the voids. In the plains where there were no coniferous trees, nature offered other solutions. There, dry grass, reeds, and wormwood were used. Wormwood was especially valued. It was light, stiff, and had a strong smell that repelled insects, and possibly had a cleansing, almost ritualistic meaning. People raked up armfuls of grass, twisted it into rolls, and laid it down in a thick layer. It was important not to skimp on the material. The more air between the fibers, the better the insulation. On top of the plant layer, a second layer was laid, made of hides or tanned leather. This layer did not so much provide warmth as protect against moisture. When a person lay down on the bedding, the heat of their body began to slowly melt the snow beneath it. If there had been no moisture-proof barrier between the body and the snow, the bedding would have quickly become wet and turned into a cold sponge. Leather, on the other hand, blocked moisture, and if treated with fat, it became almost water repellent. The next layer was the most important: fur. Thick bison robes, deer or bear skins, were laid fur side down. This created an air layer between the pile and the skin, and the fur itself, dense and elastic, distributed the pressure of the body, preventing heat from escaping. Softer furs, wolf, fox, rabbit, or blankets made of tan suede could be laid on top. Together, they formed a complex, multi-layered pie that we would today call a multi-level thermal insulation system. But most importantly, this bed was always shared. No one created a personal space for themselves. People lay down in a tight group, side by side, head to head, forming a human thermal cocoon. The warmth of their bodies combined, evenly heating the air under the skins. One person lost heat. 10 people created a microclimate. This reflected the deeply collective philosophy of their lives. Salvation is always shared. Before lying down, everyone carefully shook the snow off their clothes. The snow that got inside the shelter melted from the heat and turned into moisture. The enemy they were so carefully protecting themselves from. If their clothes were wet, they would only take off the outer layer, leaving the inner layers dry. They would loosen their boots but not take them off so that they could get up quickly if necessary. The very process of preparing a place to sleep was almost a ritual. Each people had their own variations, but the essence remained the same. Prepare the ground, line it, insulate it, and only then rest. Sometimes the elders repeated the same phrase to the children: "The earth is colder than the stars." A reminder that death comes from below, quietly and slowly. The knowledge of how to prevent the ground from taking away your warmth was passed on not in the form of advice, but in the form of action. It was part of the collective memory, part of the culture on which life itself was built. And if someone asked which technology was more important, fire, fur, or an axe, a wise hunter would answer, a thick layer of pine branches under your back. For it was this, invisible and modest, that held back the edge beyond which night began, from which there was no return. What if I told you that an ancient method, which today seems like an invasion of personal space, was the most effective way to stay warm? I'm talking about group sleeping. When a blizzard is raging outside and the temperature drops to critical levels, an individual, even if well-dressed, has little chance of survival. But a group of people, combining their resources, became a powerful generator of heat. This method was perfected. Once the insulating bedding was ready and the windbreak wall was built, the whole group would lie down to sleep together. They would lie on their sides close to each other in a spoon position. This posture minimized the surface area of the body exposed to the cold. The arrangement of people in the group was not random. It was a carefully thought-out system. The strongest and most enduring men lay on the edges, on the windward side. They bore the brunt of the cold and wind, serving as a living shield for the rest. Those who were most vulnerable were placed in the center, in the warmest and most protected spot. These could be elderly people or those who were weak. This arrangement ensured that the heat generated by the entire group was primarily used to sustain the lives of its most fragile members. It was not just a night's sleep, but a collective effort. The people lying in the center periodically switched places with those on the edge. This rotation was vital. It allowed those who began to freeze on the outside of the sandwich to move to the center and warm up while their places were taken by those who had warmed up. The next layer of protection was blankets. All the bison robes that the group had were not used individually. They were spread not under, but over all the people lying down. Several heavy skins were sewn together or simply laid overlapping, creating one huge common blanket. This top layer was critically important. It trapped the heat radiated by dozens of bodies under a single dome. The air under the skins quickly heated up, creating a warm microclimate. Exhaled vapor also remained under this canopy, further humidifying and warming the air. The entire structure, the insulating bedding below, the tightly pressed bodies in the center, and the heavy skins above, became a single living system. It was not just the sum of the heat of individual people, but a synergistic effect in which the entire group worked as a single organism fighting for life. This method required absolute trust and a complete absence of disgust or personal ambition. Survival was collective. Success depended on how coordinated and selfless each person acted. Everyone shared their warmth, knowing that in return, they would receive warmth from their neighbor. This experience was deeply rooted in the social structure of the tribes. It taught interdependence, trust, and that the strength of the community is immeasurably greater than the strength of one person. Do you think modern society is capable of such a level of collectivism in an extreme situation? In the next chapter, we will talk about what was their personal armor in this battle. Even the most reliable shelter and the most cohesive group would be powerless without the last and most important element, clothing. For the indigenous peoples of the North and the Plains, clothing was not an adornment or a social marker. It was the first line of defense, a vital tool, and sometimes the difference between life and death. In conditions where the frost reached 40 degrees below zero, where the wind turned breath into ice, and where every mistake could cost a life, clothing became armor. This second skin was not created by chance or from an abundance of materials. On the contrary, it was created out of necessity and a precise knowledge of nature. The secret of its effectiveness lay not in the amount of fur or the thickness of the skins, but in the ingenious principle of layering. Today, this principle is the basis of all modern outdoor equipment, but the peoples of America used it thousands of years ago. They knew that one thick layer would not save them. It would overheat when they moved and freeze when they stopped. Only several thin layers with air trapped between them could provide a balance between warmth and freedom of movement. Air was their main ally. Trapped between the layers, it created an invisible cushion that retained body heat. The first layer, soft, made of thin suede or tanned leather, fit snugly against the body, wicking away moisture and keeping it dry. The second layer, insulating, was made of fur, always with the fur on the inside. The soft undercoat retained heat, while the thick leather kept out the wind. The third layer, the outer layer, protected against wind, snow, and rain. It was a parka made of tanned elk, bison, or deer skin, impregnated with fats to repel water. Indigenous peoples understood that moisture was the enemy. Sweat, snow, or rain could turn warm clothing into a trap for the cold. Therefore, their clothing breathed. The oily leather allowed vapor to escape but did not absorb water. If a person did get wet, they did not wait for their clothes to dry by the fire. They simply replaced the inner layer with a dry one, using spare clothes stored in a bag, or placed dry grass under the wet fur. A simple but effective solution that accelerated drying. Special attention was paid to the feet. They were the part of the body that was always on the verge of cold and moisture, and it was here that the genius of simple solutions was particularly evident. Moccasins, soft leather boots without heels or stiff soles, allowed the foot to feel the ground, which meant moving economically without slipping. But their real strength lay in their inner filling. Each moccasin was lined with a thick, dry insole made of grass or moss. This insole not only insulated the foot from the frozen ground, but also absorbed sweat, keeping the feet dry. The grass was changed every morning and evening. The old grass was thrown away and replaced with fresh, dry, fragrant grass. This daily ritual was an element of hygiene, thermoregulation, and discipline. In modern terms, it is analogous to changing socks and insoles. A small thing, but it was precisely such small things that saved people from frostbite and loss of strength. Hands were protected with fur mittens sewn from hare, fox, or otter skins. Dry grass was often placed inside as well. This created a layer of air that retained heat even when touching snow or icy weapons. On their heads, they wore fur hats with long ears that hung down over their cheeks and necks. The neck, chin, and wrists, anywhere large blood vessels passed, needed protection. Not a single centimeter of skin was left exposed. Even the way they dressed was important. Clothes should not be tight. Loose parkas and shirts allowed air to circulate, creating a mobile thermal cocoon. Tight belts and cords were loosened when a person stood still and tightened when moving against the wind. Everything was subordinated to the balance between warmth, dryness, and freedom. When night fell and the group settled down for the night, in a snow trench under a fir tree shelter, or in a quinsy, they kept their clothes on. Only the top layer was removed if it was wet from the snow, so that it would not freeze and cool the body. The bottom and middle layers remained, turning into a kind of sleeping bag. People lay down without taking off their boots, simply loosening the laces and carefully adjusting the fur cuffs. They were ready to get up and go at any moment, if the weather changed, if a herd passed by, if a threat appeared. Their clothing was not fashion, it was survival technology. Every seam, every strap contained the knowledge of generations. It combined engineering and philosophy. Minimal resources, maximum efficiency. Where modern man would depend on synthetic fabrics and membranes, they relied on fur, fat, and air. And that was enough to survive in a world where nature itself tested their strength. And so for them, clothing was not just an object, it was an ally. It breathed with the body, moved with it, warmed and protected it, becoming part of the person. It was the last barrier between life and cold, and they knew how to make it impenetrable. All external measures, shelters, clothing, group sleeping, would be useless if the human body did not have its own source of heat. This source was metabolism, the inner fire that converted food into energy and heat. Maintaining this fire was one of the main tasks of survival. Indigenous peoples intuitively understood that in cold weather, the body needed completely different fuel than in warm weather. They needed high-calorie fatty foods. Carbohydrates, which provided quick energy, were good, but only fats could provide the long, steady burn needed to maintain body temperature for many hours. The ideal fuel was pemmican. This invention of the Native Americans can be called, without exaggeration, one of the first energy bars in history. It consisted of three main components: dried and powdered meat, rendered fats, and sometimes dried berries for flavor and vitamins. The meat provided protein and the berries provided micronutrients, but the main energy component was fat. Pemmican was incredibly nutritious and, importantly, very light and compact. It could be stored for months without spoiling. Every warrior or hunter always carried a pouch of this strategic reserve with them. Before settling down for the night in a blizzard, each member of the group ate a portion of pemmican. It was like throwing logs into a furnace. the body received the necessary resources to begin actively producing heat. This process, called thermogenesis, was triggered immediately after eating. They ate not to satisfy their hunger, but to survive. Even if they didn't feel like eating, it was a mandatory procedure. They knew that a hungry person who fell asleep in the cold risked not waking up, as their inner fire could go out. The second vital task was hydration. In the cold, the body loses a lot of moisture through breathing. Dehydration set in quickly and imperceptibly, thickening the blood and forcing the heart to work harder. However, drinking in such conditions was not easy. All the water around was frozen. Eating snow to quench thirst was strictly forbidden. This was one of the first rules that every child learned. To melt snow in the mouth, the body had to expend a huge amount of precious energy, which led to even greater cooling. Therefore, the snow had to be melted. If possible, this was done in a pot over a fire. But in a blizzard, there was often no fire. Then other methods were used. They filled leather bags with snow and placed them under their clothes, close to their bodies. The body's heat slowly but surely turned the snow into water. This warm water, sometimes mixed with pemmican to make a broth, was drunk in small sips. It not only replenished fluid reserves, but also warmed them from the inside. It was a slow and laborious process, but it was absolutely necessary to maintain water and salt balance, and consequently, life. Although many principles of survival were universal, each people adapted them to their own conditions. Nature dictated the rules, and survival depended on how accurately a person could understand and accept them. If on the Great Plains the main enemy was the wind, which blew through even the densest shelter, and hard-packed snow, which turned the ground into stone, then in the endless taiga of the Subarctic, conditions were completely different. Here, the depth and softness of the snow ruled the elements. It was in this world, among centuries-old fir trees, waist-deep snowdrifts, and silence broken only by the crunch of footsteps, that the Cree and Athabascan peoples lived. For them, snow was not just a hindrance or a threat. It was their environment, their material, their protection, their road, and their wall all at once. They did not fight the snow, but learned to use it. Their main invention, without which life in these parts would have been impossible, was snowshoes, a simple but ingenious device that turned the impossible into the ordinary. Snowshoes solved a problem familiar to anyone who has tried to walk through deep snow. Without them, every step was a struggle. Your foot would sink knee-deep, hip-deep. You would sink into the snow, expending enormous energy to pull your foot out and take the next step. But the wide frame of the snowshoe, stretched with tendons or leather straps, distributed the weight over a large area. Now a person could walk almost on the surface without sinking and move 5 or 6 times faster. Snowshoes provided not just mobility, they gave freedom. In conditions where, without them, a person was a prisoner of one place, with them a hunter became the master of the taiga. He could go after prey, explore the territory, and find a safe place to camp. It was not a tool, but an extension of the human body created by nature itself. The shape of snowshoes also depended on the terrain. In dense forests, short, teardrop-shaped models were used to make it easier to maneuver between trees. In open areas or on frozen lakes, long, elongated bear paws were preferred for maximum buoyancy. Every weave pattern and every detail of the strap had meaning. Snowshoes were not just a utilitarian item, but a source of pride and part of the culture. They were made by hand, decorated with ornamental weaving, and often passed down from generation to generation. The methods of building shelters in the taiga also differed from those used on the plains. Here among the trees, people always had building material at their disposal: wood. Therefore, the simplest and quickest way to protect oneself from the wind and snow was a canopy or a temporary forest tent. For this, 2 trees growing close to each other were chosen, and a crossbar was fixed between them at chest height. Then other poles were leaned against it at an angle, creating a sloping roof. The entire structure was covered with fir branches, laid in layers from bottom to top like tiles. The denser and more evenly the branches were laid, the better they retained snow and water. As the snow fell, the roof only grew stronger. The layer of snow became a natural insulator. The sides of the canopy were covered with the same fir branches, creating a cozy, wind-protected space. A fire was lit in front of the canopy, and a reflective screen of wet logs or snow was placed between the fire and the shelter, so that the reflected heat went straight inside. But sometimes there was no time even for that. A sudden blizzard could catch a traveler on the trail. Then he sought refuge in nature itself. In a dense forest, it was enough to find an old spruce tree whose branches hung almost to the ground. Under such a tree, right next to the trunk, the snow rarely settled thickly, forming a natural cave. Hunters knew this and used such trees as ready-made shelters. They broke off the lower branches and made a barrier out of them, strengthening the protection. Inside, they laid a thick layer of spruce branches to insulate themselves from the cold ground. If the storm continued or it was necessary to stay for a long time, a special technique came into play: the construction of a snow house, a quinze. We have already talked about this structure, but for the Athabasca people, it was a real art. To make a quinze, you had to understand snow, its density, moisture content, and temperature. The snow was raked into a large pile and left to mature, to settle. Then a space was dug out from the inside, forming a dome. The walls inside were melted by breath, becoming smooth and strong. Such a shelter was surprisingly warm. The temperature inside remained around zero, even if it was -40 outside. For people living in eternal winter, it was an engineering miracle created without a single tool. A quinze could stand for several days until the storm subsided, and then it was easily dismantled or left for the next hunter. The clothing of the Cree and Athabascans also reflected their environment. There was less wind in the forest, but more moisture. Snow melting on the branches constantly dripped from above. Therefore, outerwear was made from carefully tanned moose or deer skin, impregnated with animal fats. Such leather did not let water through and remained flexible even in the cold. Footwear, high moccasins that reached almost to the knee, protected the feet from snow. They were tied with laces over the pants to prevent snow from getting inside. Every detail of their clothing, equipment, and shelter was part of a unified survival system built on thousands of years of observation. The people of the Subarctic did not just live in a harsh world, they merged with it. Their movements were precise, their decisions economical. They understood that survival was not a struggle against the elements, but the art of balancing with them. We have already discussed the physical aspects of survival: warmth, shelter, food, and collective energy. But all of these are merely external shells. The inner source of survival is always the same: the human mind. In the open spaces of the North and the Great Plains, the real battle was not with the cold, but with one's own consciousness. The first few minutes after the storm began were decisive. When a white mist descended over the land, when trees, tracks, and even the horizon disappeared, fear became palpable. It seemed to weigh heavily on one's shoulders. Panic, an ancient instinct, rose from within, demanding movement, flight, action. But it was precisely this movement that was deadly dangerous. The brain, gripped by fear, lost its ability to analyze, and a person who succumbed to panic could go in the wrong direction, burn their last reserves of strength, and perish just 100 meters from salvation. Indigenous peoples knew this better than anyone. For centuries, their culture had cultivated not just physical endurance, but a special kind of calm, a conscious steadiness in the face of chaos. This was taught from childhood. When a child first got lost in the forest or in a storm, the elders did not rush to help immediately. They taught him to stop, breathe, and listen. They taught him to look, not to rush around. This was not cruelty, but a lesson. Those who know how to remain calm will survive. When a storm began, the tribe acted as a single organism. No one shouted or asked questions. Everyone knew exactly what to do. Some looked for a suitable place to shelter. Others gathered pine branches for bedding, and still others lit a fire. This collective action in itself destroyed fear. Fear has no grounding where there is order. Coordination was what distinguished people accustomed to living in a world where the elements do not forgive mistakes. At a time when European settlers might have fallen into despair, the Cree and Athabascans worked calmly and methodically, without wasting a minute. The wind and snow did not terrify them, only respect and concentration. It was the collective that was the main antidote to fear. One person in the wind could easily lose faith, but 10 people lying shoulder to shoulder under one skin felt not fear, but strength. The warmth of their bodies was transferred from one to another, but with it came confidence. It was not just physical warmth. it was a feeling of presence. Even in the dark, without seeing faces, a person knew that nearby was the breath of a comrade, the sound of a heart, movement, life. This solidarity also had a spiritual basis. The Haudenosaunee, the Athabascans, the Inuit, they all viewed the storm not as a hostile force, but as part of the great balance. The world was alive, and every part of it, the wind, the snow, the cold, had its purpose. Fighting the storm was as pointless as fighting the tide. Instead, one had to become part of it, find its rhythm and follow it. This worldview fostered a calmness that was instinctive. When a storm came, no one cursed it. It was accepted as a fact. Adults knew that everything comes to an end, that every night is followed by dawn. This simple knowledge that the storm would end provided incredible psychological stability. While the wind howled outside, life did not stop inside the shelter. People talked, shared stories, and taught children. Sometimes the elders told legends about the spirits of winter, explaining that snow is the breath of the earth and wind is its song. These words did more than just comfort. They turned fear into meaning. If a storm is part of the world, then being in a storm is not a disaster, but a test. Hours and days passed. No heroism, no struggle, only patience and knowledge. Survival became a ritual, a form of trust in nature and in oneself. People did not defeat the elements. They lived with them, knowing that life and death are two sides of the same breath. And it was precisely this: psychological resilience, calmness in the face of the inevitable, confidence in collective strength. That was the foundation without which no technology, no shelter would have worked. It is not only fire that warms a person, faith warms them too. Faith that they are not alone, that the storm will pass, and that an unquenchable flame burns within them. We see that the survival of Native Americans in a blizzard without shelter was not a miracle, but the result of profound knowledge and refined technology. It was a complex system where every element mattered, from the right choice of location to the composition of food, from layered clothing to psychology. They turned snow from an enemy into an ally, and the cold ground into a bed. Their main weapon was not fighting nature, but the ability to become part of it, to understand its laws and use them to their advantage. Where modern man would see only an icy desert and inevitable death, they saw resources, shelter, and opportunities. This wisdom, based on centuries of observation, allowed them to live and thrive in one of the harshest climates on the planet. Which of the survival techniques described did you find most ingenious? Was it turning snow into insulation, creating an internal fire with pemmican, or the art of group sleeping? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the wisdom of ancient peoples.